Tonight, Geraldine and John shake things up in Washington. Crossfire on CNN.
Day 3 of the bloodiest fighting in Israel in 3 years, and one of the casualties may be the fledgling peace plan nurtured so carefully by the Clinton administration. Good morning, and thanks for being with us. I'm Mary Tillotson. The fighting started over a holy place. So much of the killing in the Holy Land has been in the name of God and over places sacred to Arabs or Jews. This time it was about the Temple Mount. The Likud government of Benjamin Netanyahu opened up a new entrance to a tunnel near the Islamic mosque called Al-Aqsa, seeming to assert a new level of Israeli control over a place holy to Arabs. Palestinians protested. They threw rocks at Israeli troops who fired back with rubber bullets and were met with live ammunition fired by Palestinian police. Israel brought in heavier firepower, tanks and helicopter gunships firing into Palestinian neighborhoods. Since the killing started Wednesday, more than 50 people have died, at least 41 Palestinian Arabs, 12 Israelis, hundreds of people injured. But in a news conference this morning, Israeli officials did not offer any concessions to stop the bloodshed.
Don't regret that we opened the Western Wall tunnel, which has no effect whatsoever on the Temple Mount, which has no effect whatsoever on the holy sites. It expresses our sovereignty over Jerusalem. It expresses our desire for future economic prosperity for all Jerusalem residents, Jews and Arabs alike.
How predictable was it the explosion would come? And at this point, what can anybody, U.S. officials included, do to put out the fire? We'll talk about it right after a news update from Donna Kelly. Donna.
Mary, thank you. And now check of our hour's top stories. That deadly violence erupting following Friday Muslim prayers on Jerusalem's Temple Mount. Young Palestinians stoned Israeli police who opened fire with rubber bullets and tear gas. At least 7 people on both sides now reported killed today. Other clashes are spreading across Jerusalem and the West Bank. An experimental drug given to U.S. soldiers in the Gulf War is now being checked for possible links to illnesses among veterans. The Defense Department gave the chemical weapons vaccine known as PB to the troops when they were vaccinated during the Persian Gulf conflict. The soldiers were not told of the experimental drug because the Pentagon did not want to tip off Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein to the preparations. Richard Allen Davis has a place on death row at a California prison today for killing 12-year-old Polly Klaas. Yesterday, during a sentencing hearing, Davis enraged the victim's father with one last taunt. Davis said Polly's last words to him suggested that she had been molested by her father. Authorities said there is no evidence to support that claim. And that's a look at our top stories. And now here's Marina Colby with the latest financial news for you from the New York Stock Exchange. Marina?
Thank you, Donna. Stock investors are ignoring the usual buying incentives, higher bond prices, and lower interest rates. Instead, the stock market is sagging as investors worry about third-quarter earnings to be released in the coming weeks. The Dow Industrials are currently now down about 8.5 points. The rest of the market is mixed, with the Nasdaq gaining 2.5 points, and the bond market is stronger for the 4th day running. The Treasury's 30-year issue is up 6/32 of a point, yielding 6.86%. That is the latest financial news. I'm Marina Colby at the New York Stock Exchange.
And welcome back to CNN and Company. I'm Mary Tillotson. The spark that started the latest explosion of fighting in the Middle East was about an Islamic mosque on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. But Palestinian frustrations had been building to that explosive level over the last 3 years since the peace agreement with Israel was signed. 3 years that have not produced the prosperity or real freedom that Palestinians were hoping for in the West Bank and Gaza. Hanan Ashrawi is a member of the Palestinian Council. She is a member of Yasser Arafat's cabinet. She joins us from Jerusalem. And so does Karma Feinstein-Cohen, who was born in New Jersey but lives in Israel now. Karma is a supporter of Netanyahu's hardline Likud party. And in our Washington bureau, correspondent Barbara Slavin, who covers world affairs for USA Today. We're very pleased all 3 of you could join us. Karma, I would like to start with you in that in his news conference this morning in Washington time, Benjamin Netanyahu said that Yasser Arafat should personally intervene to stop what Netanyahu called the incitement to the fighting. But there are many Palestinians, some Jews in Israel, many reporters covering the region, many Western politicians who think the real incitement or provocation, if you will, was the action of Benjamin Netanyahu's own government in opening up that tunnel. Surely no surprise, was it, that Palestinians reacted as they did, strongly against that?
I'm not surprised that this was the reaction, but not because of the tunnel. We were actually waiting for this to happen because we knew that they would be waiting for a chance to use the rifles that were given to them and to get up and fight against us, because they weren't really happy with the fact that Netanyahu wasn't making concessions at the rate that they wanted him to. And he was firm on his stand.
He was not making concessions, Hanan, at the rate at which the Israeli government had agreed to make them under the previous Labor Party negotiated agreement, was he?
Well, actually, it's not even a question of concessions. I mean, the whole peace process, the agreements that have been arrived at were compromises. What we needed was full implementation of agreements signed. What we needed was honoring these commitments. What we needed was honoring a timetable. We weren't asking for anything that wasn't our right, that wasn't signed onto by the Israeli government, not by a party, not by a faction, but by the government of a sovereign state that should honor its commitments. Instead, we saw an escalation of unilateral actions like expansion of Israeli settlements, expropriation of land, the annexation of East Jerusalem, and of course reneging on things like the safe passage and like releasing of Palestinian prisoners. While facts were being created detrimental to the peace process, the whole Palestinian territories were placed in a state of siege that destroyed our economy and affected every single aspect of our lives, which meant that there was a situation of tremendous volatility, and it needed courage and wisdom to deal with it instead of attempting to create a smokescreen of verbal talk with no actual substance or implementation. Now, the tunnel itself, I'm sorry, Mary, but the tunnel itself is just the last straw. It was a spark. But at the same time, you heard in that press conference that Netanyahu's own advisors and the previous government and the head of his security and the military intelligence were telling him that the situation was extremely volatile and that this would be an act of provocation. Nonetheless, he went ahead and did it, which is an act of extreme irresponsibility, given the very, very precarious nature of this peace process.
We are going to talk about where things head next, but I want first to Hanan and then from Karma get a sense of what it's like right now. Hanan, you live in Ramallah. There were helicopter Cobra gunships firing into neighborhoods there yesterday. I don't recall seeing such pictures before, even during Intifada.
No.
How bad is it?
This has never happened before, as you said. It's extremely bad. It's very tragic. There are many, many civilian casualties, scores of dead, over 70 people dead among the Palestinians, and over 1,000 people injured, many of them seriously. I've been there. I've seen the Cobras firing from the air. I've seen machine guns firing straight into a civilian crowd, and I think it's extremely dangerous. However, I don't think it's too late. It reminds me, actually, of the worst days of South Africa, of apartheid, where we saw such indiscriminate shooting in an unarmed crowd. But I think that what is needed now is the commitment, the wisdom, the restraint, the intelligence to deal with causes, not to aggravate the situation, not to avoid responsibility, not to allocate blame on the other side entirely and fabricate fictitious situations, but to look hard at reality.
Let me go to Karma on this one, because I do want to get here in before we have to go to a break. I have to believe, Karma, even many of the settlers who voted for Benjamin Netanyahu, hoping he could somehow make his peace with security come true, have to be frightened. There are people who are being besieged right now by Palestinians who don't want them in the settlements. I'm curious for your perspective on how dangerous and volatile the situation is today.
The situation is dangerous not because or has anything to do with Benjamin Netanyahu. It has to do with the fact that if the thoughts of the Palestinians are really for peace, then they would continue to discuss things and go to meetings again. And Mr. Arafat would meet with Netanyahu.
I have to ask you, if you say it has nothing to do with Netanyahu, but if Israeli soldiers had been pulled out of Hebron in the West Bank, if there were not restrictions on Palestinians traveling to their gainful employment, restrictions that have put the unemployment rate at 70% in the West Bank and Gaza, if the tunnel had not been opened, would any of this have happened?
I think that at one point, even had Mr. Peres been elected in the last elections, the same thing would have happened a little bit later. It's just a matter of at what point we would have stopped making concessions, because Mr. Peres himself would have had to stop at a certain point, because as far as I see it, the Palestinians do not intend to stop with their demands of the Israeli people.
That they comply, that the Israeli people comply with the peace accords signed by Israel, those accords.
Those accords mean for us that it's just the beginning. And because we don't know what the accords will lead to, I believe that at one certain point, one or another, there would have been a big mess, as it is today, a tragic mess, and I think it came a little bit earlier than we expected.
Let me bring Barbara Slavin in here.
Yeah,
I heard a State Department spokesman in the United States today say, Barbara, that yes, there was some frustration, but Palestinians were freer now than they were 3 years ago. Is that true?
I don't believe that is the case, but I think what you see before you and your other two guests is exactly what the problem is now. There is a total lack of trust between the Likud supporters and many of the Palestinians. The agreements that were reached have not been carried out. There have not been substantive negotiations. And it's very difficult for me to see how even the United States, with all its leverage, is going to be able to bring these two parties back together.
Let's take a break at that point, and we'll talk about that very issue when we come back. Stay with us.
That was great.
Tell me about it.
It was different. It was so dark.
You found that exciting?
Incredible.
They finally did it in the dark. Milky Way dark. It's pure pleasure in the dark.
At some pharmacies, you never know who's going to fill your prescription.
May I help you?
May I help you?
May I help you?
May I help you? But at the Medicine Shop Pharmacy, there's never a question, because our pharmacists are also owners.
Thanks.
The Medicine Shop Pharmacy, the pharmacy that's all about your health. Get a free primetime gift pack with valuable samples and special offers for your healthy lifestyle from the Medicine Shop Pharmacy, the pharmacy that's all about your health.
If you suffer from heartburn, you have some new choices, but read the labels. They're not the same. This one says it prevents heartburn, and this one says it can relieve heartburn. But Pepcid AC says both. You can take Pepcid AC before a meal to prevent heartburn, or you can take it after dinner to relieve heartburn. And 12 hours later, it's still controlling acid, so you can sleep. Nothing lasts longer. Go ahead, read the labels. You can be heartburn-free with Pepcid AC.
Men, is gray hair sneaking up on you, right under your nose?
It is sneaking up on me. Here, too.
You need Just for Men gel. Brush in, and in 5 minutes, rinse.
It's the sure thing for a natural look.
Just for Men gel.
Want to know a secret? Never stop learning. Well, I just learned something about Depend undergarments. Look, Depend, with the unique cloth-like moisture barrier, has been redesigned to put even more protection where you need it most. And that makes Depend better than ever.
That's better.
Yeah, well, you learn something new every day. Depend, because you've got a lot of living to do.
We have been in constant touch with the Israelis and the Palestinians. Our message to them is this: it is in everyone's interest to resolve their differences peacefully, to work together on security, and to avoid any actions that could make progress on the peace between Israelis and Palestinians more difficult.
President Clinton has not said so out loud, but some of his aides say more quietly that one thing the United States would like to see is for the Israeli government to at least temporarily close the entrance to the tunnel that was the proximate spark that started this latest round of fighting. Barbara, Netanyahu said this morning, gave every indication he has, this is to Barbara Slavin, that he has no intention of doing that. Arafat says he has no intention of sitting down to another round of talks unless there is something concrete like the closing of the tunnel entrance.
Well, this points to the problem. The United States all along has been what it calls a facilitator in the process. That means that we try to do everything we can to help the parties get together, but we cannot force them to sit down next to each other. And the differences are so extreme now between the Likud and Arafat. They're not at all blurred as they were under the previous Israeli government. So it's a real problem. The Israelis say that the tunnel was not a provocation and that Arafat cynically manipulated the situation, that he should have known this was going to happen. Of course, the Palestinians say that this is yet another action which compromises their claims to Jerusalem.
Hanan, I would have to believe that the reason this single instance seems so important to Palestinians is because it seems to be trying to accomplish on the ground, fait accompli, what negotiations about the status of Jerusalem were supposed to accomplish.
Exactly. This is one aspect of it, which is the political aspect. The fact that the agreement stipulates that no side can carry out unilateral measures which would preempt or prejudge the outcome of issues to be negotiated.
I'm going to interrupt because this isn't the only thing either, is it? I mean, are there not Israelis moving into Palestinian areas in Jerusalem? Has there not been a Palestinian community center knocked down, razed by the Israeli government lately?
So I'm saying that this is only one aspect of it, but the fact is there has been an escalated policy on the annexation of Jerusalem, on undermining Palestinian rights, on blowing up homes, demolishing institutions, and at the same time keeping Jerusalem in a state of closure and siege and forbidding Palestinians from getting there, which they did today. And at the same time, expanding settlements, confiscating more land. All these created an atmosphere which certainly was not conducive to stability or trust or confidence. Therefore, what we needed was not to see another action which has also religious implications. Jerusalem is the focal point. Israel cannot claim absolutist ideological control and possession over Jerusalem. It is focal to Palestinians, Christians, and Muslims alike. And this tunnel somehow epitomized, symbolized a direct blow to these very deep-seated, visceral as well as spiritual feelings, as well as political commitments, and that, in a sense, ignited the whole issue.
Karma, is Benjamin Netanyahu, in effect, in a box now? Perhaps some people would say a box of his own making, even if he did not understand how violent the Palestinian reaction against this tunnel issue would be. He is now in a position, I would think, that if he wished in his heart of hearts to temporarily seal that entrance, his own right-wing constituents would be infuriated if he did that. If he does not do that, there seems very little likelihood that Yasser Arafat can afford to sit down and talk with him if there are no concessions from Israel's side. What do you see him doing to try and stop the fighting?
First and foremost, he owes his voters to keep his promises, and his promise was that Jerusalem would stay the united Jewish capital. He believes that, we believe in that, and that's why we elected him. So he can't close down the tunnel because there's no reason to close down as far as he sees it. He has stated it before. As far as the Palestinian Authority is concerned, I feel that it is necessary now to talk, and that's what should have been done. And I frankly feel that what Yasser Arafat permitted to happen is a very, very tragic mistake.
I've got to go to Hanan on this because I think there are many Americans who are not sure Arafat could have stopped it if he wished. And by it, I'm referring to Palestinian police officers shooting with live ammunition at Israelis. Is he any longer sufficiently in control of his own system of officials to control such things?
He is, and make no mistake about it, Mary. He is in full control. The police
well, then is he to be faulted, Hanan, for letting those soldiers fire? The police.
I think you're looking again at part of the picture. The total picture is that when I was there and I saw what was happening, the Palestinian police was not firing. The Palestinian police tried to form a blockade between the Israeli army and the Palestinian civilians. There were hundreds of people injured before the Palestinian police started shooting.
I must ask,
so there is an element of self-defense.
There's been a question here about whether Israeli soldiers came into the territory supposedly controlled by Palestinians.
Of course they came in. We all saw them there on television. The Israeli soldiers came into Palestinian territory, Territory A, which is supposed to be entirely under the control of the Palestinians. Not only that, but they were shooting at civilians. This is not acceptable.
If I could break in here?
Karma, is that you trying to get in?
Barbara,
go ahead.
If I could break in here, even in the Israeli press conference, there were some differences of opinion that were expressed. One of the security officials suggested that really no one was to blame, that each party was acting in self-defense. I believe that was the way that he put it. So I think one of the frustrating aspects here, and one of the areas the U.S. is concentrating on, is that we have to get away from pointing fingers of blame and saying he shot first, he shot first. It was a very volatile situation, and given the history in that part of the world, you had to expect that there were going to be these kinds of casualties. The question is, can Can Israeli security forces work side by side now with Palestinian police? Have we reached a point where this whole process is not just stalled, but is going to begin unraveling
Again,
totally?
you give me the point at which we're going to go to a break. It is, in many people's opinion, a turning point, either onward and upward with the peace process or a huge step backward. When we come back, we'll talk about which it might be. Stay with us.
Had enough of high credit card rates? You know, the average American pays about 17%. But you're not average. You deserve better. You pay all your bills on time. You deserve to pay less. Now that's more like it. A 7.9% MasterCard from a bank you know, Chase Manhattan. Call 1-800-636-2400 to apply for the card that's going to save you money. You can transfer your high-interest balances, and you don't pay an annual fee. So come on, call and apply for a Chase MasterCard with a fixed 7.9% rate until June 1997. Because credit like yours deserves an interest rate like ours. The 7.9% Chase MasterCard. Anything more is just too much. 1-800-636-2400.
I am in week 10 of quitting smoking, 6 weeks on the Nicotrol patch, and in my 4th week of off the Nicotrol patch. In 6 weeks, less than a summer, you could turn your life around. It's amazing.
New Nicotrol, a whole new and simple way to help you quit. Only Nicotrol has a 6-week program, not 10 weeks like the other patch or 12 weeks like the gum.
And at the end of 6 weeks, I was ready to say I'm a no smoker, not ready to say, well, I think I'll go down to a smaller dosage now.
6 weeks, 1 step. Take control with Nicotrol.
Saturday on CNN's Evans and Novak. From Damascus, Roland Evans brings you an exclusive, rare one-on-one conversation with Syrian President Hafez Assad. See this timely interview Saturday, 5:30 Eastern, only on CNN.
Glamorous Hollywood? Not to me. For me, it's long hours and strange locations. Can't get slowed down by irregularity. My doctor says exercise, eat right. But sometimes a meal is whatever you can grab between takes. My doctor suggested Metamucil, the only leading brand with 100% natural fiber, like the fiber in healthy foods. Keeps me regular, gently, so I can give my usual award-winning performance.
Metamucil, the doctor's natural choice for regularity. At some pharmacies, you never know who's going to fill your prescription.
May I help you?
May I help you?
May I help you?
May I help you?
But at the Medicine Shop Pharmacy, there's never a question, because our pharmacists are also owners.
Thanks.
The Medicine Shop Pharmacy, the pharmacy that's all about your health. Get a free primetime gift pack with valuable samples and special offers for your healthy lifestyle from the Medicine Shop Pharmacy, the pharmacy that's all about your health.
My mama, she makes the best chicken cacciatore this side of Italy. The best. But sometimes I get heartburn from my mama's cacciatore. So before I come over, I take a Pepsid AC. Forgive me, Mama.
Mio figlio adora il mio pollo alla cacciatore. Però io, dopo un pezzettino, che indigestione, devo prendere un Pepsid AC.
Before a meal or after, Pepsid AC lets you eat the food you love.
Guarda che faccia sto figlio mio.
You can be heartburn-free with Pepsid AC.
Saturday on CNN's Evans and Novak. From Damascus, Roland Evans brings you an exclusive, rare one-on-one conversation with Syrian President Hafez Assad. See this timely interview Saturday, 5:30 Eastern, only on CNN.
It's the third day of the worst fighting since the Intifada and since the signing of accords between Palestinians and Israelis 3 years ago. Karma Feinstein-Cohen in Jerusalem, where do you see this going in the next few days? Is the peace process irreparably damaged? And if not, what can be done to put things back on track?
First of all, damage has been done, but it can be stopped if, actually, of course, if both sides are willing to, you know, to have an agreement, to make an agreement that we're going to sit down once again and discuss things and stop using arms. And I think Benjamin Netanyahu now is at the point where he's basically, what he's saying now is, I want this to stop. I want to sit down with you, Mr. Arafat, and start talking again. If you go out and you continue to fight my soldiers, to fight our people, we're not going to be able to sit down and discuss things.
Is there any concession, Karma, that you think Netanyahu could make at this point? Could he give a firm time for withdrawal from Hebron of Israeli soldiers? Could he temporarily close that entrance? What can he do to get Arafat to the table?
I think concessions have been made. I don't think it's time to make any concessions. We've made all the concessions we can up till now, and I think that at the rate the agreements are going, or the Oslo Accords are in the direction they're going, there's not much that can be done.
Let me go to Hanan, next to you, closer than Arafat and Netanyahu are at the moment. Absent something concrete from Netanyahu, Hanan, where do you see this going?
Very simply, I think Netanyahu has to begin immediate implementation of agreements. We don't want to renegotiate them. We don't want to open up old files.
And if he does not?
He should begin implementation, and he should also refrain from continuing with settlement activities and prejudging the issue of Jerusalem.
But if he doesn't?
If he doesn't, then I think he's dooming the peace process to failure. But I think that there is a historical responsibility. This is not a question of individuals, Mary. It is not Netanyahu's career or anybody else's career. It is a question of the future of our children.
Do you believe he will do those things, though, Hanan? He shows no indication of it yet.
Well, the problem is without accountability and without genuine intervention, probably a third-party intervention. I think the U.S. has a tremendous role to play now, despite the elections. Put the elections aside. They can intervene. They can put the peace process on track if they have the will and if they are willing to intervene and to try to address the real issues.
And to Barbara, the likelihood of that happening in an election year.
It's always difficult, but certainly the United States is trying as hard as it can to get the parties to sit down together. But I'm afraid this hasn't played itself out yet. We're probably going to see more violence before they do sit down together.
And can there be a peace process salvaged?
Well, one hopes so. There have been many such explosions in the history of the Middle East peace process, but I would have to say that this is the most serious crisis we've seen since it began.
And I heard Hanan, we're out of time, but saying optimistically she believes it's salvageable. We very much appreciate our guests being with us today. Hanan Ashrawi, Kama Feinstein-Cohen, both of them are in Jerusalem, and Barbara Slavin is in Washington. We're appreciative everybody out there was with us, too. Hope you have a good weekend. See you Monday. I'm Mary Tillotson, and now here's Sonia Rusler with a look at next hour. Sonia.
Thanks, Mary. Just ahead on Newsday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu speaks out on the deadly violence engulfing his nation. We'll tell you what he said and have a live update on the unrest. Also, the 104th Congress started with a roar and a very specific agenda. It is about to end a little more quietly. We'll go live to Capitol Hill to find out what it achieved. And we'll tell you what the presidential candidates are doing and where they are in the polls. Those stories and much more just ahead.
Today on CNN's Burden of Proof, author Joe Bosco had one of the best seats in the courthouse for O.J. Simpson's criminal trial. But did he see the same trial other authors saw? 12:30 Eastern on CNN.